I found that same Boniface quote. It's from one of his letters. He says, "The church is like a great ship sailing the sea of the world and tossed by the waves of temptation in this life." So that became the organizing principle of my next collection of poems.
How many books you got?
I think this will be 6. So
We got to talk about your works more, especially your Christian humanism stuff. We got to talk about that more. Okay, I found it. Here it goes. So, just in case anybody else wants to know, there's this post. There's a place where it has all your posts, and on Instagram you can save it. I must be getting old because I don't know why I didn't find this earlier. Anyway, Filmmaker Zone. I follow these guys on
okay.
Instagram. They got all kinds of information about films and movies and stuff like that. And they had the most expensive TV shows in history. So the first one up, of course, was
Game of Thrones.
No, wrong. No. Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power.
Oh, the new, yeah. Okay. I
58
actually
million
hadn't
per
heard
episode.
that yeah.
Yeah, that's 58 million per episode.
Right.
Stranger Things, number 2, 30 million per episode.
That the news. That must be the new season. That's crazy. Which the 4th season was incredible. I don't know if you've watched it yet.
I never got past the first season. Talk about that later.
First season. I watched the first season before when season 2 had just come out. Season 2, I was a little bit of a letdown, but then
it gave me the
I
same
liked
feeling.
what they were doing, so I stuck with it. Season 4 made it worth it.
I knew they were setting me up for something. It was too good.
Everybody's always.
It was too good. I didn't want to be let down. You know what I mean? It was like.
Yeah. So the 4th season, though, they did the Freddy Krueger was, Nightmare on Elm Street was their, was the kind of organizing horror story. And they did it so well. And I mean, it's much more horror than the previous one, than seasons 2 and 3. And, but it was super well done.
The other problem I had, Jason, with it, I'm not gonna lie, this is the other problem I had, was it reminded me too much of It. And when I ever start feeling that feeling of fear,
oh yeah,
me, that's I'm out.
That's exactly what that's what they're doing. And season 1, I mean, they just said we're trying to do family friendly horror that the family.
There's no such thing
together.
There's no such thing. No, doesn't exist. WandaVision, have you seen million.
Okay, that makes sense. But did you see Nope yet?
Nope.
Dude, Aaron and I went. I mean, yeah. I won't say anything. I won't. No spoilers.
See, this is like Jordan. See, Jordan is playing with fire with this though.
Oh, I know.
Jordan is playing with fire. He know the black folk. We it was just enough to like. We want to go.
Even the name of it. I was like, this. He knows exactly what he's doing.
Remember,
because it wasn't. What was the? I'm trying to think of what it was, because it was that even the phrase "nope." I remember it comes from. I can't remember if it's Chris Rock's stand up or. But
Eddie Murphy.
He's like,
it was Eddie Murphy.
Is it Eddie Murphy?
Yeah.
It's like black people. They don't put black people in a horror movie because you know what we're gonna be like. We're gonna be like, nope. Is it Eddie Murphy Raw?
It was Eddie Murphy about going into a haunted house.
Yeah,
black folks.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. They go inside of a haunted house. Like, oh, it's a nice house. It looked really nice.
Yeah, we're all gonna go in there, and he's like, black folks are like, nope.
All of a sudden, you hear a sound that says, "Get out!" And you're like, "All right, we're out of here, baby. We ain't him down." It's like, nope, we out. Yeah, I think it's Eddie Murphy.
And so when I saw the like just the teaser, the 30-second, and it was called Nope, and I was like, I will be there opening weekend. Because I know exactly what he's doing, and he's such a great screenwriter. He's really good. This was really well written.
He's the other side of J.J. Abrams. You know, they share that same sort of.
Yeah, but with J.J. Abrams, he's capturing he captured that kind of ET late 70s, early 80s vibe and brought it back to life really well. And then he just got too much money. And it's like a lot of people where you give them an unlimited budget, and very few people can handle an unlimited budget.
J.J. Abrams is what came. He's the person who came after After Effects became a common thing. He's the kind of creator that is birthed out of After Effects, and us being able to have our own ability to create, kids being able to have their own ability to create their shows they want to create from their inspiration, you know? Okay,
Yeah.
here, House of Dragons, 20 million per episode.
Okay.
I'm going somewhere
That makes
with this.
sense. Okay.
The Pacific, 20 million per episode.
The Pacific?
Yeah. It was
What's that?
You don't remember this one?
I don't remember this one.
I saw it was on, I think it was on HBO.
It's like Band of Brothers.
It was kind of like that, yeah.
Okay.
Apple, they ain't playing with them. 15 million per episode. I never watched more than half an episode. I couldn't
half of the first episode. Yeah, that's about how
you
far
too.
I got.
It was like I mean, we got a whole bunch of people out here blind. I'm just not gonna be. It's just. Yeah. I guess I could turn it off myself and just listen to it.
Right.
Game of Thrones.
But then you get Pitch Black. Do you remember that movie, Pitch Black?
Yes, I do. That was one of my favorite films.
Oh,
yeah, it was a low budget joint too. Game of Thrones was 15 million per episode.
Okay.
The Mandalorian, phenomenal. 15 million per episode. The Crown, 13 million per episode.
That's pretty amazing. I mean, it's so well done.
Now, what?
I'm about 4 episodes into that one right now.
The Crown? I should watch that?
The Crown. Yeah, Aaron and I are watching it right now. It's really good.
So, I went through all.
I know the story vaguely, so it's really, really well done.
I wasn't going to talk to you about this, but I just happened to run across this and it messed me up. I went through all those and I was like, man, what Christian do I know? My Pillow, think of large institutions, large companies. I could convince almost every Christian to pay for a $200,000, $300,000, $750,000, $1.5 million documentary or film. I don't think outside of maybe one concept could I convince a Christian to come up with 20 million, 15, $13 million per episode for anything. I don't think I could convince them that it will be valuable, worthy, or a good pursuit in order to be able to create enough noise, attention, impact, cultural impact. I couldn't convince them that spending that kind of money on shows like this would be valuable to the kingdom. You know what I mean? I was just thinking about that, but these guys, you know,
they absolutely get the value. They understand what it is that, I mean, but it's like what you're saying with Stranger Things. You know, they're setting you up for something, right? Like,
yeah,
they know that if they're telling you if they're the best storytellers, that they're the ones forming the moral imagination of the next generation. I mean, that it's in the beauty. It's the thing that it looks the most beautiful is the thing that you're going to look at and say, I believe that's good. Right. That's the way our moral imagination is formed. And if Christians think that that's all that it's all trickery, but that's actually the way God built the world. Because he is goodness, beauty, and truth to the nth degree. We're designed to see those things as fitting together. The fall temporarily sometimes can separate them, but storytelling is a way of is the way that that's communicated from generation to generation. We don't tell our kids stories anymore. We depend upon somebody else to tell stories. The church doesn't support the arts. It doesn't, you know, the way that it used to. It used to be the one, you know, it used to fund a lot of art, a lot of beauty, because it was it understood that the world fit together that way, and so it knew that one of its jobs is going to be to make sure that beautiful art is created that is true and good. Um, we have passed that all off, and there's something fine about that, because I mean it's not like the church should be the only one making sure that art gets funded. There's a capitalistic aspect to it, but
Yeah, but it seems to be very left focused, centered. I mean, you know,
well, but that's because that um, the leftists, the communists in particular, knew that you have to go after the artists. You have to go after the art training institutions, the media institutions. You go after those institutions, um, with your because that's how the imagination of the next generation is formed, and so you go for it. And uh, there was a concerted effort amongst the communists to go after newspapers, to go after um, uh, schools, institutions, seminaries, even, um, and to purposefully go after those institutions, spend money to ideologically conquer those institutions. Um, and the the conservatives were busy kind of rotting from the inside, so we missed it, right? We weren't we had uh we had compromised, and the church wasn't in good shape. The church was, and so we got there was an end run that we didn't have anyone to guard that run, and they ran and got a touchdown
so
over and over and over.
I- there's man, there's a whole lot of questions I want to ask right now, Jason. So our moral imaginations are going to be shaped by something. They're not just going to sit there. Something's going to shape them. When I've said this before, we've been talking about this, and when I saw these numbers come out, I'm thinking to myself, man, they have really put their money deep, deep money, and have stolen some of our stuff. I'm sorry, Lord of the Rings.
Hmm.
Um, we should. That's on us, man.
Yep. I mean, the fairy tales. This is one of the things that was really interesting. I was just started telling you about this earlier, that I just finished a really great podcast series about Nixon. Um, Nixon, he got in hot water with the media because he went after Alger Hiss really hard, who turned out to be a communist spy. Um, but in the process, he got sideways with a whole bunch of screenwriters, that he knew had connections to the Communist Party, and people that had gotten really high up in Hollywood, and he just said, "That's I'm going to out them all," and so he did. He just was, and now the way Hollywood tells the story is that it was this, crazy black blacklisting and all of this, but there were actual real communists and communist spies that had worked their way into um, real positions of power in the media. And now we know that because the USSR fell and we've got all of their papers, and right, so we know that it was actually really happening.
They
Um,
infiltrated the media.
right, they had infiltrated the media, and the what they say is they were true believers, and there was a lot of folks on the left, especially amongst um, especially amongst the segregationists, because there was so much compromise amongst the segregationists. They were an easy target, and the left just kind of slipped right in. I mean, you got to remember, like, Hitler was Times Man of the Year twice. Everybody looked at the socialists, because that's what Hitler was, a National Socialist. They looked at the socialists and the communists, and they said they're onto something, right? On the left, like they're gathering all of the power into the state. They're centralizers.
Yeah, even America was looking at them. I mean, them and Russia,
mm-hmm.
right? We were looking at both of them.
Russia, looking at the USSR, and they were saying, they're really onto something. Look how well they have gathered the power into the state. They're going to get rid of poverty. They're going to create equality. They're going to restore what we have. They're going to restore equality to society, and right now, we don't have it. So all of that really worked,
or at least create a paradise that we're trying to create, right? Like,
right, yeah,
that was
exactly.
part of it.
Because they're going to restore us to the garden.
Yeah, and part of it too is because they're coming out at this point. If I remember, I think it was you to put me on to Paul Johnson's book, Modern Times.
Mm-hmm.
You have the collapse of the market, that they're coming out of that too, and everybody's trying to rebuild their society, and the working class are having a problem with the rich class, and so they look like they've had it all worked out. Where people are thriving
because everybody's moving to the city. They're kind of losing their connection to their families. They're losing their connection to multi-generational parish churches, stuff like that they'd had, and they're moving to factories, and there's unscrupulous factory owners doing things they ought not to, and unions are forming in order to try and restore, like, when you go out, even today, if you go out to a small town and you talk to the commissioner of a small town, or the mayor of a small town, and you say, hey, I've got this project and it's out there on this thing I'm trying to build out there, and he's like, oh yeah, that's out next to Danny's property, I know him, our kids go to school together, or our kids play soccer together, or baseball, or whatever. You're less likely to have a mayor that just says, yeah, do whatever you want, if he knows that across the street it's going to affect Danny, who he knows his wife and kids and his grandparents, and or their second cousins or something, right? The connections that are still there protect you from just running over somebody. When everybody moves into the city during the Industrial Revolution, what you get is this depersonalization of your neighbor, that makes it really easy to just treat people like cogs that are in a machine. And you've got the philosophical shift going on, where people are becoming more and more their imagination is formed by a new set of metaphors that are more of a machine driven system. The world is a machine, the world is a clock, the sky is a machine, my neighbor is a machine, a biological machine, and then society as a whole is a machine, with the people being cogs. And so they're taken over by this whole understanding, and so then they start taking advantage of one another. Evolution is growing as well, right? So people are just, it's survival of the fittest in business. It's survival of the fittest in the way the city runs, and into that steps communists that say, we will equalize everything. We will take the power away from the rich and spread it out to everyone. We'll take away the wealth, and everybody, and give that wealth to everyone, and everyone will be rich. I still see people doing this sort of thing, where they say, oh, he's building, Elon Musk is buying Twitter for $44 million. That would, $44 billion dollars,
44
and they
billion,
start
yeah.
doing the math and saying he could give everybody such and such amount of money, right?
Right.
and, and but that's just, people don't understand that's not how economics works, right? If all of a sudden every single person has $1 million, $1 million just now is worthless because everybody's got it, right? $1 million becomes $1. That's
Can
how
we
it works.
try? Can we try just for a little bit?
Right, just for a little
No, I
bit.
get
Yeah, but
it.
it's the illusion, that the problem, that the problem is a math problem, right?
Yeah.
That it
Yeah.
can be solved that way. But it's that illusion. You start saying, man, if I had $1 million. The problem is if everybody on your block suddenly had $1 million, everybody in your city suddenly had $1 million. It just go that the $1 million just doesn't mean what it did 10 minutes ago. There's a great DuckTales episode about this, actually.
I
If
think I
you
might have remembered that one.
Yeah, where there's so much gold that gold becomes worthless. It's
Yeah, just
really
laying
it's
everywhere. Yeah.
yeah. And there's it's old it's so but that's the thing, is there's the storytelling system, was taken over by people that are bad at economics, are bad at math, they're bad at normal human life. So what they're making beautiful is no longer true, is no longer good, right? And that's and but they didn't, it's not propaganda in the sense that they don't that they know they're telling falsehoods. They actually believe it. That's why it works. And as Christians, what we've done is we've either said that's a bad use of storytelling, stories are lies, we aren't going to take part anymore, and we try to back out of the system, and that doesn't work, and so we lose our kids, or we try to tell the story the way we wish it was, and that ends up, and then our kids say, hey, we got lied to, or the third option, which we haven't really tried, which is actually believe our own story and then put our money where our mouth is and tell stories that way.
I I think we went out to the Ark Encounter about a week ago, a little over a week ago now, going on 2 weeks, and it was amazing to see. Just after reading about the Ark so much, and always talking about the flood, and going to see that somebody actually took the time to build and remake the Ark and to tell that story and all the other stories around it. And then, so in the Ark, they go, I think, from the flood all the way up until the Tower of Babel. And they deal a lot with race inside of the Ark, and they show the seed from Noah, his sons, and how every other race came from them, and then where they went to. And it was really, when you think about it, the importance of that story and be able to create and tell that story. I'm thinking, man, we have TV shows galore inside of,
Right.
I mean, we have a line that ends, right? That, there's, that doesn't make it anymore because of how he treated his father, right? And that line's done. It's over. And then the other two, and those carry out. And then how in the world do we get all of these people from these 6, and it's just amazing. And so we haven't even begun to tell those stories. We haven't begun to walk through that. We haven't begun to spend our money look, I love me some Lewis. I think we need to be telling a lot of his stories. I think I love, J.R. Tolkien. That's great. I want those stories, but man, we got a Bible full of some amazing stories that we haven't begun to dig deep into the imagination of. And these are the kind of stories that shape our moral imagination in ways that other stories don't, right?
Yeah. Well, and
And
I think that's one of the things that we have not yet even, that we just don't know anymore. We don't realize anymore, that the one that the person who tells us the best story, is the one that wins the contest. And that's, it's, I call it the Horatian principle of literature, the Horatian principle of literature, or the Horatian principle of storytelling, because Horace, is the one who first wrote it down. He was just a Roman poet, Roman statesman, and he just said the one who teaches the best lesson and tells the most beautiful story will always win the contest, right?
yeah.
When it comes down to it. So if you tell a story that is both true and beautiful, then, or that is both good and beautiful, then people will see that it's true. The same way with true and beautiful. But that if you don't tell a beautiful story, then you lose the contest, right? It doesn't matter how, if you're right, if your story's ugly, you'll lose. Right.
So our moral imaginations have not been shaped by Christianity over the last what?
80 years, 100 years.
At least 100, 150, right?
At
I
least
mean, you got to
100,
mark
150,
Dewey,
yeah.
right? Like that Dewey really does start the process of helping that process. But we had to have
And
our
that's
moral imagination.
1920s when that really sets in. Is the new system, but really, I mean, it goes back. The different story begins being told as Carl Linnaeus. He's back in the, he's a Swiss guy, and Rousseau, Diderot were the
You talked about him
philosophers.
before. You talked about him
Yeah,
before, right? Yeah.
yeah. So he's the one that put together. He's the one that coined the term Homo sapien, Carl Linnaeus, and he put together the different genus, species. This is the kind of these are this is what you're seeing when you look out at the living world. He organized it into the branches that we still use. All of that. He organized the human race into black, yellow, red, and white. He invented the idea of races of humankind, all of that. So, and then Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he said, there's no one that did more to form my understanding than Carl Linnaeus. Jean-Jacques Rousseau's understanding of right and wrong and what a human has been more influential than probably anyone.
Even
Because
Darwin, huh?
even Darwin, because Darwin is ugly. Darwinism's ugly. Darwinism came along. He looked at Carl Linnaeus's his organization, and he gave a mechanism to how it came about.
Right.
And Nietzsche said that once we have bought into the cosmology, and he's talking about Carl Linnaeus's cosmology, he's talking about the new astronomy of his day. And once we've bought into that cosmology, he says all we have to do is give a plausible argument for where, or a plausible story for where religion came from, and people will become atheists themselves. He says you never have to argue for atheism once you have gotten people to accept an atheist cosmology. Well, Jean-Jacques Rousseau actually gave a Darwin's version is ugly, right? Darwin, Hitler's book was called Mein Kampf, My Struggle, and he looked at Darwin and he said, it's survival of the fittest, and went for it. And everybody was like, whoa, we can't have that. That's ugly, right? Power is that you look like orcs at that point, right?
Right.
You look but Jean-Jacques Rousseau came along, and he gives this an understanding of Linnaeus's philosophy that looks attractive, because it makes you it's cool, and it's it's the that you've got this kind of outsider that comes along, and he sees reality for what it really is, and he's able to stare it down and kind of live out the meaninglessness, and see that we are just living in a social construct, right? So the whole idea of a social construct, social contract, the whole thing that comes from Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He's the one who gives us the language that we still use to talk about morality and society, and this is the roots of nationalism. That we have decided together as a people that this is who we are, and this is what we agree on, and we're going to write a constitution. We're going to all agree on it together, and we're going to create ourselves a people, create ourselves into a people, create ourselves into a nation. And Jean-Jacques Rousseau is the one who gave the flavor of gave the language and the basic metaphysical understanding that you could do that people could form themselves into a nation. And there was some of that in America at the time, but it was really tempered because most of them were Christians, right? And so there were so many Christians there dealing in covenantal terms that the American Revolution was tempered. But there was some of the self-governing is right in and of itself. Self-government is the right of a people.
Democracy,
we
right?
can form democracy. We can form ourselves into a nation, and people, the government rules by the consent of the people, right? That sort of language, it's there, but because there's also the historical covenantal understanding of the common law system, of the relationship between the king and the people, and because that's all there to temper it. It doesn't really take over till you get to the Civil War, really. So
Whoa.
I mean, you had other philosophers helping form the idea. Denis Diderot, and the encyclopedist movement in France they were doing a lot to make it look intelligent. But Rousseau, I've taught my kids when they hear Jean-Jacques Rousseau's name to spit when they were little. He's the destroyer of Western civilization. But the problem is he comes wearing, he comes looking cool. He comes looking like, he was sort of the Monty Python of the French Revolution. He came beforehand just wanting to burn it all down, because he literally said society is the root of all evils. If you can just give individuals the freedom to be themselves, then you will create paradise on earth.
Which is completely opposite around, because after the fall, the first thing the guy institutes is a government in order to be able to deal with men who commit murder. And
right.
So
governments are a blessing
to restrict evil from men.
To restrict evil, yeah.
And he's saying no, society and the government's get in the way from men actually being free. It's interesting,
right?
So then,
because freedom is the ability to do what you want, right? That's his definition, society is always the limiting factor. And so kind of the Rousseauianism really reaches its peak in somebody like Freud, right?
Right.
Where you give that scientific definition to what Rousseau just sort of felt and emoted and
How how does Rousseau and nationalism come together?
well, the idea that um, that a people group can sort of get define itself. Um, that's Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So the idea that the nation um, that that uh, so that the French people should have an official language group, and that everyone should have to assimilate into a particular language usage to be a part of the group. That there are official, um, official traditions, that sort of thing, that make you French, and that that French identity is the thing that holds us together. That's all comes out of the French Revolution and um, the, that new cosmology, that new Enlightenment cosmology. So um, that's somehow a real uh, a a real thing that you have to that should be preserved by order of by coercive power or something like that, right? So
Well,
you have it
so
happen, and you have it happening other places as well, because it ends up happening in Italy, it ends up happening in Germany, and it goes wrong in other places as well, but Jean-Jacques Rousseau just gets there first.
so the defining this is going to be interesting. The defining marker from Rousseau ultimately is that a nation is defined by its language, by
Yeah,
um,
it's language, it's
its,
traditions,
its
and
traditions.
that um and that if that 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 you know they should stay separate, they should stay pure, that those sorts of things. They should, because they're a particular branch of the human race, and so
Isn't is that not true? I mean, when I think about Israel, you have Israel that is a nation. They're marked off by circumcision. They have their own language. They have their own customs. They have their own traditions, right? And if you're going to be a part of Israel, you're going to have to do all the things that it takes to be an Israelite.
yeah, well, God was keeping them pure because he had made promises about their genealogy. They had genealogical promises from Abraham. Once those things are fulfilled, though, Paul immediately starts saying these are no big thing anymore, right? So that the customs, the traditions, right, that those were, so the food laws that forced them to stay separate, the tracking of the genealogies, the purity laws of the surrounding genealogies, that was what it looked like to believe that Abraham had a genealogical promise coming that would eventually lead to the Messiah.
So let me push back a little bit on that because
Okay.
this is interesting. This is going to be interesting. Oh my goodness, this is about to get interesting. Um, if I was going to respond, I would say, yeah, Paul is talking about that as in a salvific way, but he's not speaking about how that defines them as a nation necessarily, right? So what Paul's talking about is, well, salvifically, people can come now and don't have to identify that way in order to be saved, to preserve that. But if it's we're talking about Israel as a nation, those are things that have been a part of them and their custom and tradition since their founding with Abraham. Those things aren't put away from their customs as a part of who they are. Some things maybe are as far as like sacrifice and stuff, right? Like those are things, but there's other customs that go along with that make them who they are.
Right. Well, and which is why Paul says, hey, you want to keep one calendar, they want to keep one calendar, you want to keep one Sunday, you want to keep Saturday, go for it. Right. Paul doesn't say you don't have to, you have to eat a certain way. He just says you can't judge one another. Right. That there's not rivalry between, that food, this food. He says you can't strangle animals. He says, refrain from sexual immorality, refrain from abusing your food, and strangling it, thinking that you're getting some sort of extra life out of it by taking the life of your animal, in a, strangling it.
Same basic Levitical stuff.
Right. Yeah. Well, there's 4 laws in Leviticus that aren't that apply to everyone and not just the Israelites, and those are the 4 laws that they list at after in Acts 15. So here's what applies to everyone. Doing. Right. Yeah. So yeah, don't drink blood, don't strangle your animals, refrain from sexual immorality. Right? So there are things that are universal, and then there are things that were there to set the Israelites apart and protect the genealogy, because there was a genealogical promise given to Abraham, right? So they were, but they protect the Davidic line, right? The genealogy of the Davidic line. All the other genealogies after, Ezekiel prophesies that that they'll all be knit together and forgotten, and you lose the only prince that they still know after the exile is the Prince of Judah. They've lost who's the prince of, because there was a Prince of Judah, but there was also a prince of Benjamin, a prince of the only one that didn't have a princely line was Leviticus, but that was because they had a high priest, their high priestly line. So, and the separation of powers between the religious authorities and the civil authorities is something that comes out of Genesis, or that comes out of the Pentateuch. So, that's you don't get that really anywhere else outside of the Bible, separating the powers, and they're eventually recombined in Jesus and then reseparated. But because you had them combined in Adam, recombined in the new Adam, and then reseparated for wisdom's sake. But you have this entire all of the tribes of Genesis, of Abraham, the tribes of the Abrahamic people all disappear except for Judah and the Levites. They're all, and Ezekiel says, here's one of the blessings that's going to come. You're going to be combined back together. So that, because you have the 10 tribes that go off to Assyria, and then the other tribes that go to Babylon after the exile, because Assyria is conquered by Babylon. And then when they're returned from exile in Ezra and Nehemiah, all of that tribal layering of jurisdictions goes away. So that Paul is a Benjamite, but you don't know who's the Prince of Benjamin. It's gone away. Who are the elders of Benjamin? And that all that goes away, and that's fine. That's just that God is doing something different. Keeping each tribe pure was not his concern. And once Jesus comes, then that promise is fulfilled. And so
it's interesting because I'm just gonna rip the Band-Aid off now. So then, because it's interesting right now, nationalism is a big thing, and it's been a big thing, but it's really coming back. It's coming back with a lot of fervor, and particularly Christian nationalism. What's scaring the left to death. It's funny to see how much they've pushed. Actually, I think they might have pushed it first, and then Christian nationalism has come out and started championing the title in one way or another. Because it's not something I remember hearing years ago, and like George Bush was running, I don't remember anybody claiming to be a Christian
Accusations of
nationalist.
nationalism. Yeah.
No, 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 no. But it's resurrected itself. But has it? I think people are. Well, let me just ask: is it resurrecting itself under Rousseau or under Israelite Old Testament biblical perspective, or is from what you're saying, it sounds like there is no nationalistic biblical perspective, or is I don't even know here. I'm so confused. What what
No, I
is?
mean, I think our understanding. I think nationalism was formed um, in the vacuum of the vacuum of a post Christendom West. So from Christmas Day of 800, when you had the Holy Roman Emperor crowned, to 1806 when the Holy Roman Emperor fell. Um, you had a balance of powers between a Christian international government and internationalism, and then the kings and nations and republics, and all the different kinds of governments that you had in Europe, which was a mishmash of all different kinds of governments. They were held together by Christendom, by the Holy Roman Emperor, the Holy Roman Empire, and the relationship to it, and you had different Christian empires and emperors, but you had this understanding that the church held us together, and then there was a series of layered jurisdictions that also held us together. So the identity was you had a multi-layered identity that went from your family to your parish church, and then ecclesiastically, up to the Pope in the West, up to your patriarch in the East, and then you had governmentally, you had you had your local government, your city, your and then depending the landowner, there was all different kinds of authorities, and they were all layered on top of one another and past one another, and so when you what somebody wouldn't say, I'm Dutch or I'm Spanish, right? Their language group wouldn't be the thing that gave them their identity once, because it was a series of overlapping covenants that gave you your identity, with your baptism being at the heart of it, right? Your and the so you might be a serf in a particular lord's house, but then that lord, he was devoted to a particular king, and he could change which king he was devoted to if he needed to, but it was a personal covenantal relationship. um what Linnaeus did in reorganizing the human race around what you could see, see and hear and touch, is he really actually um, dislodged us from our identity, and um, and then they reorganized it around language group, or they reorganized it around later around skin color, or they reorganized it around
Uh-huh.
something phenomenological, right? Something that you that was it was no longer a matter of faith, and I'm not talking just faith in God, right? But faithfulness to a covenant vow, faithfulness to, or the covenant vow of your parents or your grandparents, or 7 generations earlier, a covenant vow that was made. It was no longer a matter of faith; it was now a matter of sight, and nationalism grows up out of that, right? It grows up out of an understanding that what is it that holds me to my neighbor? Well, we speak the same language. we speak the same, or we have the same skin color, or we have the same traditions or something like that, right? So something that you could see or touch or taste, those were the things that held us together, rather than faithfulness to covenants
That's
that are
interesting. So I gotta
layered.
so when you say our identity, changed, our identity was marked out by the covenants and the oaths in which we made with others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That was how
a
our
whole
identity.
series of oaths, right? And so and oaths, not and but it wasn't just our oaths, right? It could be oaths that our ancestors
Others.
made, right?
So
So
that's
we're
covenantal, though, right?
covenantal, right? So it's that is something, so you have people that would say, well, my ancestors were conquered by Charlemagne and became Christians, and so I am upholding that oath. Um,
Because they swore oath to Charlemagne.
because
Yeah,
they swore an oath to Christ, because Christ, or because Charlemagne had sworn an oath to Christ, and he was their new king, right? And they took that stuff seriously, right? So they believed in Jesus because they'd been saved from paganism by Charlemagne's sword, right? The you have,
That's fascinating.
it was a connection, it was a connection to history. They had been reinserted into history by Jesus, by their baptism. They had been inserted into a particular story. And so you didn't look around and say, who looks like me, who sounds like me, who eats food like me, that's who I must be. That that gives me an identity. You just that's not It's just an enlightenment way of thinking, of defining the
Nationalism
world.
is?
Nationalism
Nationalism
is,
is
yeah.
how is an enlightened way? How
Because
does
it is based, it's a phenomenological ordering of society. And what I mean by that is it's ordered according to what you see, what you sense, what you sense with your senses, your five senses, right? So um it's a way of trying to um trying to get a definition of who you are, get a definition of reality through your senses.
but what happens though when you take that and you put Christianity over the top of it and say, okay, we are an American group of people who, in this country, have decided that we're going to serve the Lord Jesus Christ. We want to acknowledge that. We want to uphold that tradition and that reality. That's not anything that's shaped around what we see necessarily, but because we are Christians, and so you you Christianize it. You put the marker. You
Yeah,
change the marker of identity from it.
right. Well, we're supposed to disciple the nations, though, right? So that means we
Shut
go
up,
to
Jason.
them, and
Shut up, Jason. You
sorry.
trying to be nice
So
with me.
I am. But like we go to them and we say, empiricism isn't actually the right way to make this definition, right? It's a covenantal. So we teach them, right? We don't let that. So if and I mean, and maybe what we do is we end up taking the word and redefining it. I mean, maybe that's what we end up doing. But I mean, I think that it's our job to disciple them, not to to pick sides in the world's battle. I guess I don't know.
So I guess maybe there's still so much still on this nationalistic side. When I how does a nation then define itself? What is a nation? How should a nation think of itself? Because the way that you're talking about Rousseau, and even the way that I think we are taught about American history, I think you're right. If it wasn't for Christianity, Rousseau's concept would be far more. But Rousseau's concept looks like a form of covenantal parallel. Like it looks like it parallels the idea of covenantal thinking. So they can kind of go together in some sense. So I guess you had to define, like,
Well,
what is a nation supposed to be, and how does it define its markers and borders and who it is?
so those are historical questions, right? So
Oh,
what Rousseau wanted to do is bring all the French people together, all the people that spoke French. Well, that problem is that's not where the political borders were. That's not where the legal boundaries were. It wasn't, and so they had to kill a lot of lords in order to bring the French people into their Frenchness, right? To make them French, because
whoa,
there
that's
was
scary.
and so that's what they did, is they killed a lot of people. At one point during the French Revolution, a third of Paris was in jail, right? Like it was crazy the amount of bloodshed that it took
Because they weren't
to
French?
no, because they wouldn't go along with the program, right? So um the the
You know what I mean by that? Like, so because if they're defining and they want to bring the French people together, and you're not, well, no, that's not how we're going to define this. And you're like, well, then you ain't French. And then you just take them in.
right,
Kind,
that's
kind,
exactly what it is.
kind of how black people put black people in jail. Well, you ain't black then if you don't like
Yeah,
chitlins.
right.
It's like, well, lock me up because I'm not eating them.
But
And it's not happening.
I think it's closer to what when Biden was running and he said, if you don't vote for me, you're not black, right? It's closer to that, where he's like, you get in line with the political program. I still can't believe he got away with that. I can't believe that he got away with that. But that's a whole nother
That
thing.
Can I just speak to
That's
that just really quick? That you have to understand how weak of a mind you have to have for someone to say that, And I think there's two things. I think that there's a bunch of people who like, I really don't want to be considered not black. There's another group of
right.
people who are like, we really do hate Trump that much. I just don't care that he said what he said. We just hate Trump that much.
But when did that shift happen? Because I don't remember Trump being that hated. I mean, he was in Home Alone. Like Trump was in Home Alone. He was that's a whole nother issue.
But
I don't know how
that's
to.
right to the point though. The defining marker of what I think the nationalistic idea has not just been something that's a push on the right, but on the left. And so everybody is defining nation and saying you're not in then, right? Oh, you are in here and you're not in. Okay, now you're not in. It's the same thing that's happening with what you're talking about with France, right? It's just that we haven't gotten to the point yet where, well, actually, they've gotten to the point with Trump where they're saying you're out. You don't deserve to be
Right.
in power. We want
Yeah.
you arrested. We
Well,
want you in
we want
jail.
you
It's leading
arrested.
there,
Yeah. And
you
that's,
know?
I mean, so I think the attraction of nationalism is that internationalism is we think of internationalism as the option, and internationalism is you're picking between international communism and international World Economic Forum, Great Reset type of internationalism. If those are the options, then nationalism gives you time to work out something. But it's only going to give you a generation, because
Wait,
I
what do
mean,
you mean by
historically
that?
speaking.
You mean
So
to fight
to
against the
fight against
globalism?
the globalism, right? So World Economic Forum, globalism, if so, nationalism is a co-belligerent with that stuff, right? Because that's bad stuff. That is soul crushing, human destroying, child robbing stuff, right? And so when nationalism comes along and says, "Hey, let's fight that together," um, that I get why people say, "Okay, yeah, we gotta fight that." So, and nationalism is a co-belligerent. It's not a long-term co-belligerency though, and that's what history teaches. Nationalism lasts a generation, right? Nationalism is not a long-term solution. So, there's a reason that that Napoleon came into France within a generation, right? Nationalism nationalism has always ended up creating a chaos that is then put down by a tyrant. It's what always ends up happening. And so, um, Napoleon came in and he said, "Okay, I get it, but you guys have all failed. We're going to create a French empire." And he was a tyrant. Now he was well loved early on, and that's what makes him complex, right? Is he came into the revolution, the bloody the blood in the streets revolution, that nationalism melted down into, and had to and ended it by force, and everyone was grateful. The problem is then he turned and started trying to conquer the world and make it all French. You had the same thing with Russia, right? The Russian nationalism ends up becoming the USSR. You have the same thing with German nationalism, which ends up sparking World War II when Hitler starts trying to conquer France, conquer Europe. So,
But
nationalism is an attractive co-belligerent in the moment.
but shouldn't nationalism, for what it's trying to do, be completely opposed to everything that's inside of globalism?
Yes, should. That's what I'm saying. Is
But it's a
ideologically
yeah.
we look at it and say, okay, there's a good co-belligerent. It is not an
Oh, I see what you're saying.
ideology that historically stays in place
I see what you're saying. A co-belligerent for us, not a
for
co-belligerent
us.
for, yeah, I got what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah.
So then, because we are looking for something that's just as big as the globalist monster, or that's just as powerful as the globalist monster, to be able to fight it, instead
because
of
because because there's a so in Christendom there's already an emperor in place, Jesus. When we were created to have an emperor, and so if Jesus isn't there, if Jesus isn't in place in our imaginations, we'll hunt one down. We'll push somebody else up into it. It never will last, because there's already somebody on the imperial throne. We've already got a King of Kings and a Lord of Lords. But when you have ideologies in which Jesus isn't the emperor, we're going to try and create one. We're trying to make one, try and push somebody into that spot. It's just human nature.
So this is why when we're talking about our moral imaginations, our moral imagination does not have Christ as the emperor of the world right now. And so
Yeah.
because of that, I've actually heard, I think Todd Free, I can remember him saying it almost. I have to go find the clip somewhere where this is a long, long time ago, where Christ isn't ruling earth right now, isn't ruling he's not here ruling, the devil is. He's ruling.
Right.
And if you have that kind of mindset about the world, then the world has to completely be destroyed, and you got to pick your emperor to fight for you until whenever that happens. And you
got to find an emperor that can hold back the chaos, right? Because there's because you're gonna have chaos, and so you're trying to gather enough power to hold back the chaos. But if Jesus is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and he is in the process of regardening the world, because he's the new Adam, or he's the gardener emperor, and then you don't have to gather up enough power to hold back the chaos. You just have to be faithful to Jesus, because he's doing that, right?
Hold on one second. This is absolutely intriguing to me, because now my daughter was here and she was outside waiting. I had to go open the door. So if can Christian nationalism and Emperor Jesus, are they the same? They're not the same?
It-
Same? How are we doing
I
that?
think so. I think that I mean I think that's what the Christian nationalists are trying to do. I don't I don't know if if the word is redeemable, because I think the word has a particular definition, and it 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 has a metaphysic, it has a cosmology embedded in it already.
Can you wait. Okay, hold up. Don't forget what you're about to say. If you got to write it down, whatever you got to do.
Okay.
But you got to talk about what is the metaphysic, what is the cosmology of it that is fighting against what they're trying to do.
So I think the cosmology that's embedded in nationalism is that we are that the world is such a place that we are the ones that organize it into its meaning, right? So that the meaning comes from the self-organization that people bring to it. I believe that cosmology is embedded in the word already, right?
So
And
that's what you're talking about when you're saying it's enlightenment. The idea
yeah,
of
right. So guys like Diderot and Rousseau and Hegel and that's their understanding, right? Is that as subjects, we add meaning to the world either by organizing it or by naming it, identifying it, right? That it doesn't have the meaning within itself. I think that's what's in the egg, and so it's going to hatch eventually, right? So you can stick a lizard egg under a chicken, but you're going to get a lizard when it hatches. I think. So I think that's what Christian nationalism is. But like I said, like I think that that most of the Christian nationalists, I think that they think, well, no, we can reclaim this and redeem it, and maybe they're right. I mean, I might be wrong. I think historically speaking, nationalism lasts a generation and brings about more internationalism. And I think that nationalism is an empiricist definition. It brings an empiricist definition of humanity with it, right? But we're not empiricists. We don't get our definitions by sight. We get our definitions by the word of God, by covenant, by its relation, by a thing's relationship to Jesus. So that's my take. Is I haven't dug in and thought about it as much as maybe I should, but that's kind of my.
I'm a theonomist. I don't know if you know that. I don't know if I've ever told anybody.
Yeah.
But that's kind of that's how I. And I'm not like one of those crazy theonomists. I'm a good theonomist. I'm fine.
So every theonomist says.
No, for real. I don't know if you can find a cooler theonomist than me. It's nearly impossible because, but I'm pretty hardcore on it. So
right.
when I see this kind of new thing with Christian nationalism, I really do like. You can just bring my water, babe. I really do like what they're trying to do. Like, I really do like what they're trying to do. I think what they're trying to do is say, you know what? We want to honor our heritage and where we come from. We're Americans. We have come a long way. God has blessed us in that process, and we don't want to forget God in what we've done. We only have the nation that we have because of God and honoring God in the things that we've done. And we see a whole nother group trying to come through and remove the foundations that have made this country what it is. This country is only what it is because of the Christian foundation that was here, and as imperfect as it was. We've never seen anything else in history have this type of fruitfulness. And we are the culmination of not just what our forefathers of American forefathers, but a tradition that goes back even before that. And we don't want to lose that Christian heritage, Western European tradition. I mean, come on, it's been a blessing to the world like none other. And so the what we see coming is this type of blurring, mixing, diluting of that tradition in order to, just like fat does the muscles, to separate it so that it has no strength. And the ideas that we see coming are nation destroying because of how it gets into the details and then moves out all the muscle, all the Christianity, all the foundations of our heritage. And so what we want to do is say, no, we have the foundations of a Christian nation. This is what has cultivated us. This is what has made us. This is the tradition, the people that we've come from. This is our heritage, and we want to keep that. That's what I think and we want to keep promoting that, and we don't want to be ashamed of that in any kind of way. And so that's what I really believe, that when people are pushing the idea of Christian nationalism or nationalism as a Christian side of it, that's what they're trying to hold to at the end of the day, because they're seeing the attack, and they're saying, wait a second, if we don't do anything, we won't have the heritage that we grew up with at all.
Yeah, right. And it's all filthy rags, though. That's the problem.
Well, look at you. See what you did.
I mean, it is. I mean, I think we need to repent of our righteousness.
Wait, are you calling us the new Pharisees? That's kind of like calling us a new Pharisee. Oh, Jason. Jason.
But I really.
What was bad about what I just said?
It's right. I mean, any righteousness that isn't Christ's righteousness, I think,
I built it all for Christian
more dangerous. But that's the thing, is if we look at it and we say this thing is rotten, right? The foundations are rotten. The rot has gotten in, and we say anything other than Lord forgive us, we're in trouble, right? And what I inevitably end up hearing is people saying, they're the ones doing it to us, Lord. They're the ones doing it to us. That's not repentance. That's not the way out of this mess, right? The way out of this, dead things rot.
Jason.
Living things don't rot.
You just made me think of something.
Western civilization's rotting but it's rotting. It's not rotting because of what somebody else has done, right? It's rotting, and it is rotting. And I love Western civilization, and I teach it, and I defend it, and I try, but it's rotting. And the way out of that, what we need is resurrection, because we've got a corpse on our hands, right? And the way through has got to be repentance. And so if instead instead
of a clutching for it,
I think so. I mean, I think it's the and I'm somebody that wants. I mean, my kids talk to each other in Latin around the tables, so that their parents can't understand. Like, I studied Anglo-Saxon and defend I love Western civilization. This has nothing to do with that, but it's because I love it that I want to be able to say, Lord, we're covered in filthy rags. I do not want to defend myself. I want to be raised from the dead. I don't want Western civilization to keep defending itself. I want it to be raised from the dead. That comes from repentance.
I've been going through Doug's book on federal husband. I hate it.
Yeah,
I hate it.
It's like, why you keep stabbing me in the back?
It's horrible. it's it's the kind of stuff. If you want to be made well, that's the book you read.
Hmm.
Right? Seriously, and you know why? The way that he deals with responsibility changes the way that you handle all of your problems that you're facing.
Hmm.
When before and I've been here now 8 years. I've been working through a lot of things that have enlightenment stuff and bad doctrine and a bad upbringing and home life. Just so grateful for what God gave me and fix it, Lord, at the same time,
Yeah.
like um
Right.
but one of the things that has been a massive turning point is that when you take responsibility for your home, when you take responsibility for your family and for your sons and for your daughters, you don't then try to fix them. What you end up doing is taking responsibility and said, all right, Lord, I failed in this.
Right.
Help me to do that. And then so you take full responsibility of the situation, and then your response to it is different. And so what it sounds like that I'm hearing from you is that the the Christian nationalist movement has made the other folks the reason why we're failing, instead
Yeah.
of saying we're failing because we've forgotten who God is and have neglected to raise our kids in the fear and admonition of the Lord, baptizing them and teaching them to obey everything that God has
Right.
commanded them to do.
I
And
mean,
so that because of that, we have been overrun by wickedness in other nations that are seeking to conquer us. And so because of that, we should say, oh Lord, we've sinned, we've failed, we're the
yeah.
ones responsible for the fall and collapse of Western society.
Right. And I think it's ironic to watch all of the fight going on right now over libraries, what's in the libraries, what's not in the libraries, in an illiterate society. Right. We we're not we're more concerned about about keeping certain books out of our libraries than we are about getting the best works the of literature and Western civilization into the hearts of our children. Right. It's it's hard to watch. None of those books are dangerous. You know why? Because nobody reads. It doesn't matter what books you put in the library. Nobody's there, right? So, if we had a society that was full to the brim with people that really, really, loved the best and greatest poetry, then you put the let me tell you about growing up trans poet book in the library, and nobody's going to care because it's like, well, why would I pick that when I've got this beautiful book over here, right? But I think one of the reasons that we care so much is because we're not producing literature that can compete. We're not telling stories that compete. We're not writing poetry that can compete. And so the only thing that we can do is coercively control what goes into the library because we can't because we're not winning the war of actually telling the most beautiful stories.
So now that you've made all the Baptists mad, you go and
Did
make
I? I'm not
everyone
trying
else
to. I
mad.
love my Baptist friends. And nationalism is Presbyterians' fault, right? Nationalism is secularized Presbyterianism. 100%. Right? That's not the Baptist fault. You can tell all my Baptist cousin pastors. It's not their fault.
Now we're gonna
This was
have.
our fault.
Now we're gonna
Somebody
have to
clip
have.
that and share it as far
Share
and
that.
wide as what Baptist. What I said about Baptists.
Wait, are you serious though? You consider it a Presbyterian problem? Like
Oh
the
yeah,
Presbyterians?
this was solely our fault. So you secularize Presbyterianism, you get nationalism, because I mean Presbyterians were it was our idea to try and put together a confession for all the English speaking churches, so nationalism is a secularized Presbyterianism. So
How? I mean, because now you just made Baptists mad too. Because if you got Baptists who are Christian nationalists, they're like, wait a second,
Wait a
I'm
second, this is
responsible for
ours. Yeah,
both sides
yeah.
of this now.
No, I mean, I think, um, so, rather than, I subscribe to the Westminster Confession of Faith by oath, both as a ruling elder and in my ordination as a ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church. So I love the system of doctrine of the Westminster Confession, and um, the I, but um, and I think the original intent of getting together and writing a confession, um, to try and sort through some of these things, I think was a good idea. It had to happen because you had, the meltdown of Christendom happening around you. So, um, the it, nationalism was a way of saying the legal boundaries, um, your legal boundaries stop at the be here, and instead the legal boundaries are here because of the language that's spoken. um they're trying to, so here's a good example. So the arguments, they had to have a legal argument on whether or not you could have an English translation of the Bible, because it had been declared illegal to translate it everywhere where the bishops of the Roman Church had jurisdiction. Well, they got together and they put together a legal argument, on English soil, that you could translate it into English, because Ethelbert's Psalter, King Ethelbert's Psalter, so the 700s, um, had a Anglo-Saxon and Old English and English translation of the Apostles' Creed, written into the front, probably in the king's hand, right? So the king had translated, the Apostles' Creed into English for use in English churches. They had, a translation of the Book of Genesis in English that was in circulation in Ethelbert's day, um, and as well as, certain psalms, as well as a number of different stories from the New Testament. They had a, a version of, uh, what do they call it when they take all the gospels, and put them together into a single story? They had that translated into English for use in the English churches in the 8th century.
A Gideon Bible.
And no, it's a, oh man, I wish I could think of what it's called. A harmony of the gospels, right? So
Okay,
they had
yeah.
a harmony of the gospels that was in use in English, in the 8th and 9th century. So before they ended up switching over to the worshiping in Latin eventually, but they argued that before, that happened, they were worshiping in English. They had English translations of the Bible, so that it should be legal on English soil to have English translations of the Bible, and that the Bishop of Rome was overstepping his legal jurisdiction. That argument continued into the arguments about whether or not you should have, bishops or Presbyterians, because the Celtic Church was organized along Presbyterian lines. Cunningham makes an argument that the early church, and that the early English church was organized before the Roman, the Bishop of Rome, Gregory the Great, sent a missionary to England, that you actually had, the church organized along Presbyterian lines, right? So, so the arguments were all, the English-speaking church organized itself this way, right, on English soil. So nationalism, it ends up growing out of these arguments over against the overreach of the Pope. So the Pope tries to hold together, and the Holy Roman Emperor, they try to hold Christendom together by making different concessions, but you end up with the 30 Years' War between it was not just between Roman Catholics and Protestants. It was between the papal authorities and the Holy Roman Empire and national authorities that wanted to be able to organize themselves along national lines. And some of the people that fought against the Pope were Roman Catholics, right? So you had French troops, German troops, English troops. They were Dutch troops that joined together to fight against the overreach of the Roman Catholic Church. The Presbyterians were the ones that gave a theological, historical, legal argument to the nation state being older and more organized around linguistic lines. So when that gets secularized, it gets
what do you mean by secularized? Explain that.
When they try to separate those realities from Jesus, what they do is they end up saying, with the new secular cosmology, they end up saying, what's the organization around then? Language, nation,
okay.
And so you get things like, there was a bunch of different dialects of French, but then Parisian French becomes the national dialect and everybody has to use it. There's a bunch of different dialects of Italian, but then Dante's Italian becomes the official Florentine Italian, becomes the official dialect under I think just shortly before Mussolini, right? So you get these nationalist movements that really are secularizing some of the arguments that are being made by the English church at the time and the German church as well, because they're trying to figure out how to be split between the Lutheran and the Roman Catholic Church. So you end up having, in the late 1800s, finally somebody that combines all the German speaking areas together. Well, he was a Protestant, right? He was a coming out of the Reformed German tradition. So nationalism's on us, not on the Baptists. They wanted to organize everything around ideas and
you just bit your tongue.
And such.
So is there a way to not secularize nationalism? Or is there a way not to secularize the Presbyterian idea so that it works?
I mean, I do think that you had I think that you could have some sort of international Christendom that's organized around conciliarists. The conciliarists argued for it. Dante actually argued for a version of conciliarism that's never really been tried, but I like his conciliarism. So that you have that instead of having, so he didn't like the infallibility of the Pope or the Pope over. He wanted the bishops to be all equals, and then they gathered together and made decisions in a general assembly,
like a presbytery.
Like a presbytery. But it was still they sent bishops instead of sending elders, right? So you have different versions of that. Eastern Orthodoxy has something closer to that, although it I think falls into something similar to what the Pope ended up falling into. with its patriarchates, but they have, um, but that's mostly because of not everybody staying in as good of fellowship as they should have. So it's not a theological. It wasn't a theological political decision as much as it was. Um, there's just some of the patriarchates that had difficulty staying in fellowship well. But I think it's possible to have, to have a non-secularized uh, international Christendom that that um, has room for the different churches within different language groups and within different areas to be self-organized and then responsible to one another,
I think
submitting
so.
to one
There
another.
is. I think that's kind. I think North would kind of fall into that. Would agree with that actually, because there was a the way that he talks about that. There's a church is the only thing without borders.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
the
When he was Anglican, and so I think the
who
Anglican
was
church has North, wasn't he Anglican?
Gary North? I thought he was Presbyterian.
Oh, no. All this
Yeah, I
time I
think
thought he was Anglican.
I could be wrong, but
I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
I
You're
don't think
much
he's.
more likely to be right about him. I think I just always assumed he was Anglican, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, and that, I don't know how I
I
feel about that. Yeah, yeah. No, I think he was Presbyterian.
Okay.
I could be wrong, but I'm pretty
No,
sure
I
he was
just
Presbyterian.
I thought that theonomic movement, because wasn't Ray Sutton Anglican? I thought that
I
came
think
out of
he went
Anglicanism.
Anglican at some point. Yeah, I think he went
Oh,
Anglican, but
interesting.
I don't
Okay.
think he was.
I did not know. I am not the guy to ask about anything that's happened in the last 100 years.
Okay,
You
that's
gotta get
funny.
older than that for me
Just,
to have
I don't
paid
know about.
attention.
So uh, our man, we might have to do some more on this because there's something underneath. So I've really never liked the Christian nationalism thing. Is my reason for not liking the Christian nationalism thing yet, and I know most of the people who I agree with are more leaning into that, and I bond with them, and I'll bind my steel with them all day long.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
not even the my problem has always been that it's something that it feels like the other side has given to us to
yeah.
put on our front of our stuff and to march around with is like, yes, we are. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't like the way that they're doing that. So I want to
It,
avoid that while embracing what I think is being meant by people who are holding to this, which is some sort of sovereignty of God and emperor of Christ over all things. That's what I'm
yeah,
talking about. That's why I like Christian intergalacticism, right? That's
yeah,
I
yeah.
love that, right?
So
It's
that
there's no borders
nationalism
for
is our N word. Is that, would you say that?
no, I don't no, man, I don't I give me some time to process that. That that might no, no, the left gave it to us to say, so I don't think so. You know, although I think though it is the word that I think many people there are people mean different things by it. I'm watching people trying to work out what it means and the ideas that are behind it. I don't know if it's been completely settled yet. That's why I was
Yeah,
asking, like, what is like nationalism? What is it? I think people are trying to work it out because here's another thing: is that people don't have an identity anymore because
right.
of, and this is where
Yeah.
I think your responsibility stuff is important. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I think that's at the heart of a lot of this is we're people that are detached from reality. We don't have an identity.
Gnosticism.
Gnosticism, right? And so um
Wow.
nationalism comes along and it offers, I think it's trying to offer a real connection, right? Here's your people, here's your, here's your traditions, here's who you are. And I remember when nationalism was still powerful when I was young, because I mean I remember people, I think I've mentioned this story before, but when we're my second grade choir singing Proud to Be an American, and all the people crying
Yeah.
in the Mullen Road Auditorium, right?
Yeah, I
I have
remember
that
that.
memory, um,
Yeah.
and being, I mean, I was just listening to somebody tell the story of the moon landing, and it brought me to tears. Um, Patriotic tears, right? That was America that did that, right?
Yeah.
It's an amazing story, and we should there needs to be room for patriotism within our Christianity, right? With well ordered loves, patriotism is a high is love of our being patriotic is a high virtue. Uh, and this is one of those things that when I first read Dante, it really challenged me because um, Dante puts the unpatriotic way down in hell. Um,
Mm.
and and at the time I was like, man, that's so medieval. And now I think, no, that's really true. But the question is, patriotic to what? Am I patriotic to an ideal, or am I patriotic to a covenantal reality? Right. And
Mm.
America is a covenantal reality. Um, but so's my county. My county is a covenantal reality. My state is a covenantal reality. My city is a covenantal reality. My family is a covenantal reality. Um, so the
Hold on. Let me
it's
ask a question.
because he puts the unpatriotic with the oath breakers, and I don't think that we would think of um
Right.
that's not where that's a different understanding of our citizenship, maybe. Because we're not just simply citizens of the world or something. That's the error the other direction, right? We're citizens of particular covenants.
And this is what you were talking about when you started this. And those covenants have historical backdrop to them, right? And
Historical
they're layered,
realities. Yeah.
historical
Yeah.
that are layered, multi-layered. This is I don't know how you don't. This is man, this is gonna get me in trouble, but this is why only Presbyterianism really makes sense covenantally. But
Well,
and you know why? Because here, otherwise, you create a world where your kids come into it and aren't tied to anything ultimately, right? There isn't.
I
You,
yeah.
you see what I'm saying? Your
You mean
kids
the
come into.
infant baptism? Is that what you mean by
Yeah, that's what I
Presbyterianism?
mean.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
Presbyterian, yeah, infant baptism, because your kids come into this world with commitments already
Right.
to the God of their parents, right? The county that they're in, the sheriff
Hmm.
the the
They're
country that they're in. They're born with covenant realities already intertwined because of the covenant of their father.
right. And if you try to the only way to secularize all of those realities is biology, right? So that's why you get skin color being so important, right? Because it's a biological reality in which I can say which people are mine, right? Well, if it has to be something that I can see or touch or identify um, with my senses, then skin color becomes the easy thing, right? So those are my people, right? So and that's what I mean, that racism it's an attempt to have a secular version of Presbyterianism in America. um it uh it's
Interesting. So, but that
because you're
doesn't.
looking because you're assuming there is a historical covenantal connection, right? That's got to be there. But if it's not something that's by faith, if it's got to be something by sight, then it becomes racism.
Do those do those realities of what I see still a part of um the deal of so uh I'm trying to figure out how you said that because uh there is a tie there, right?
The bi
From
the biological tie, you mean?
yeah, yeah, there is a biological
Yeah, well, I mean
tie there.
there's a biological tie to my family, right? But if I, but just running into a dude that has the same skin color as me doesn't make him family. Right? I don't have covenantal a covenantal commitment.
Do you have, so let me ask it like this. Do you have a covenantal commitment to your ethnicity? So 'cause in that sense, and I guess
Yeah.
in your color
Well,
of your skin.
so ethne, the Greek word, and ethnicity are not the same. So ethnicity is an English word, and um,
Mm.
it's a fallacy to say ethnicity the way we define it, and ethne, the Greek word, are the same thing. So, um, so
So when we're talking about
the,
skin color and we're talking about people, we're actually talking about different things. We
yeah,
should be talking about
so
different things.
right, so Paul, he says, I I I want my people, right, to be saved. Right, he's talking about the Jews, and he's talking, but it's not a skin color thing, right? Um it's a uh you know but it's still a real thing, and he says I want them to be saved, but he also washes his hands of them and walks away and goes to the Gentiles. um in the book of Acts, right? Like he says, okay, I'm done. I'm done with them, and he walks away, and we don't look at him and say, oh man, he's breaking a vow, or he's doing exactly what God is calling him to do. He walks away from his people to his people, because his people are no longer his people. His ethne is the church. His ethne becomes the Gentiles. um
And he even goes so far as to say the mark of a real Jew. So he marks off as the one who has been
mhm.
circumcised in the heart, not on the
Right.
exteriors. He makes that pretty clear of what defines his people now.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's and it's complex, because in Romans 11 he says, I want my people to be saved, but I also know that it's going to be a long time. It's going to be all the Gentiles are coming in first. um so there he's not precious with his people. It's not stick with them or else, you know because they're not the yeah it's he's like, yeah, I'm the best, and he even says, like, I'm really really Jewish, and to hell with it all. It's it's all filthy rags. He repents of it, right? Then in Philippians.
Hmm. Just thinking about the Tower of Babel, part of the criticism that was given to the people was that they didn't go out and spread out and become separate, right? They didn't, you know, if you look at creation, the order of creation, God forms it. It's good. He separates it, right? Keeps doing that over and over. And here it goes again. God has these people, they're created, they'll do this thing. They're not separating. They're not doing, so he separates them just like in creation again. And so there is this, um, as there, there is all these different groups now that are created because of that type of separation.
Mm,
And so it's to be distinct, it's to be um different, right? And so that, and God is looking at that and saying that's what he wants. It's beautiful that those different separate distinctions between people. He likes all that. Um, do you think that that's kind of what some of these, I think I see it in some of my black nationalists, maybe I could call them, and some of my white nationalists that are out there, um, are trying to protect these kind of groups, uh, and then the Christian ones are in there too, and then trying to just making sure that they have these distinct groups, um, and preserve them, um, for the beauty of it.
it, well, a couple of things. One, it doesn't stay beautiful generally very long. if you say, hey, we're going to go over here with just our racial group and try and preserve it, right?
Or
It gets ugly really fast in every historically in every situation I'm aware of. Um, but I think that's because if you've got something good, your job is not to preserve it; it's to share it. Right?
mm,
That's how we treat blessings. And if we hold our life, we lose it. If we give it away, we get it back. And um, so, I mean, I think if you say, you know what, man, I love being Scottish, and so I'm gonna try and retreat and hold everything about being Scottish to myself and protect it. You're gonna lose it. But if
well, okay,
you
but won't you
love it and
won't you
share
lose
it,
it? Well, okay, so then I hear the other side of this. Aren't you going to lose it though if you merge it with something else? You'll lose what. So if you Scottish marry a black woman and then these two merge, you've lost Scottish, right? You're thinned out the Scottish tradition, right? So preserving it means that it gets to live on, and so that it can be
so
observed.
man, if your Scottish heritage is so fragile that it can't be passed to one of your children because their skin is darker, then your Scottish heritage is really not much. It's pretty thin, right? I mean, it, that
Wow,
seems that just seems like if that's not a heritage that's even worth protecting if it's that weak, if it's that
that's
thin.
though that that's a lot of. I think even that's a lot of people who feel that way inside of Black culture too, that are very
I
much
think
like,
so. I mean,
you know,
you pointed out when I was all excited about Toby Nwingwe's because man, I love his beats. I still do. His new
yeah,
album,
yeah,
his
yeah,
beats are fire.
the
But you
resurrection
were
of hip
like,
hop, man.
yeah, you're like has black nationalism, and I couldn't see it because I just wasn't familiar. And then as soon as you pointed it out, I was like, oh dang, you're right. Because he's a good poet, he's a good writer. His wife's a good writer.
He is.
Um, and but it is black nationalism, right? Now black nationalism is not necessarily a big threat to me. I'm not
Right,
I'm not going to fall into that very easily.
right.
And so it's like listening. I was listening to Portuguese hip hop this morning, and I was like, yeah, I don't even know what it have. I don't even I know some of the words, but I don't know Portuguese. It just happens to be close to some languages that I do know, and so I know some of the words, but the pronunciation's so smooth, and because of the Portuguese language is so smooth. So I'm loving it. It's not. And a friend of mine that speaks Portuguese, he was like, "That song's actually pretty dirty." And I was like, "Yeah, it's not totally not a threat to me. I don't know the language well enough for it to even affect me, right?" Um, and so, uh, but if I came, so I think there is just some of that like it, there's a certain kind of nationalism that is a temptation to someone in my situation, and there's a certain kind of nationalism that's not. Um, but it's anything that you start taking pride in, right? That we're supposed to say, no, I don't do that, right? I boast in Christ, period.
Mm.
Um, so
Right.
everything
I like
else
how
is
you said it
a
earlier
gift
too,
to enjoy.
when
Um,
you talked
uh,
about rightly ordered loves. Like that
mhm.
is because I think you have one
Yeah,
side that says, nah, not at all. But no, no, no. Rightly ordered loves. Put it in the perspective it's supposed to be in.
right. Yeah. So
You know?
my Scottish clan is the Fairleys of Ross. My grandma can trace our family back to the 600s, the 7th century, and the Fairleys they were the handsomest men of the clan of Ross. So the handsomest son of Ross they were called they were fairest, so they're Fairley, which is and so and then you can trace the family down when they came to America, all that. I love that story, and I the first Scottish General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church. What my I'm a direct descendant of the man who preached the first sermon there. Right. I love it. I've told my kids that. I love that. The founding pastor of the Baptist church in I believe it's St. John, Washington. It's about it's the if you're driving from Spokane um to Moscow, that 30 minutes in, you hit the rest stop, and then there's that next town. The only church in town there for generations was founded by my great 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 grandfather, right? So I love my heritage, and but it's not righteousness to boast in. It's a gift to enjoy. Um, but what do you do with gifts? Well, if you try to hold on to them, you lose them. You got to share them. So, that's, I mean, and then people that are like, oh, you should marry within your race. They just don't, that's not how, I mean, Solomon, the wisest man in the history of time, of all, he says there's a handful of things I don't understand. 7 of them. One of them he lists as the way a man and a woman fall in love. He's like, yeah, that's a mystery. I don't know how it ever happens, ever works. If you want to then say, yeah, but let me limit it even further down to, you can only marry with it. It's like, that's just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. Man, there's so much I want to talk about still with this, but we've been already going at this for a minute, and we still haven't got to this doggone poem that you haven't got to it. But you know what, though? I think this is really interesting, just to speak of poetry, is because part of it is being able to see so many things operating, like these covenants within covenants laid on top of each other. It's poetic, right? Like that is,
yeah.
I
think it's a poetic vision of submission, in which we get to do a lot of submitting to a lot of authorities, because they are the jurisdictions of the authorities that God places in our life are layered poetically, and we get to do a lot of layered submissions, and it's beautiful. I mean, my elementary school librarian was the first one to hand me a book of King Arthur, and I was like, for years, all I want is a queen. I wish I would have been born someplace where I could have a queen, right? Because it's such a beautiful vision to have of that he presents of Queen Guinevere and the whole thing, right? Like but we don't present we don't have a vision for the beauty of the way God organized the world, and so we don't pass it on to our kids. We end up submitting ourselves to an ugly vision of reality, but that's just the way it is. We stare down the harsh realities of the world and then swallow, and then you can't pass that on to your kids. Your kids end up the opposite of you.
Well, you won't be passing anything on to your kids because the moral imagination has already been sowed into by the secularists. So they'll pass on whatever moral imagination to your kids. I mean, just to end it back where we started, this is why this is why Christians need to invest inside of changing the moral imagination of the world. We need to be Christians who are in love with God, in love with Christ, in love with our Bibles, and go make things from Scripture and from just the lovely world that God has given us that impact and fight against this negative unbiblical cosmology, and put a new moral imagination inside of the next generation in the next 20 years. We need to give $20 million to a episode, a series, and put it out there. We need to make so much news that we do what Kevin Costner did. Remember, he came out with the first multi-million-dollar film. It was super million, like $200 million for Waterworld. Yeah, and nobody even cared if it was a good movie or not.
Right.
But they got impacted by it because Kevin Costner came and did it. right? And so, like, let's do something that makes a whole lot of noise. Well, if we can do that, if we have the ability and the skills
Yeah.
in which to do that. Otherwise, if you don't, read great stories that create that moral imagination in your kids.
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure I mean, I texted you this the other day, but I also think I broke the code on how to do it too. But
Shh, you don't say, don't share that here. We'll talk
I
about
won't.
that later.
I won't.
All right, man.